Hello, this is Kathy Kelly. I'll be presenting on Piaget's theory of cognitive development and how it relates to spiritual growth. First, a quick little insight as to who John Piaget is. John Piaget was born in the 1800s and was a very talented student. He published his very first scientific paper when he was 11 years old. He was his parents' very first child. Piaget's mother, Rebecca Jackson, attributed his intense early interest in the sciences to her own neurotic tendencies. Yet his father, he was a medieval literature professor named Arthur, modeled a passionate dedication to his studies, a trait that Piaget began to emulate from an early age. His early exposure to the intellectual development of children came when he worked as an assistant to Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon as they worked to standardize their famous IQ test. Much of Piaget's interest in the cognitive development of children was inspired by his own observations of his nephew and daughter. These observations reinforced his up-and-coming hypothesis that children's minds were not merely smaller versions of adult minds. His lifelong work included many honors and accolades. He was the author of more than 50 books and 100 journals. One of the things that he was quoted, his way of basically summing up his own passions, is the phrase, "The current state of knowledge is a moment in history, changing just as rapidly as the state of knowledge in the past has ever changed, and in many instances." Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through 4 different stages of mental development. His theory focuses not only on understanding how children acquire knowledge, but also on understanding the nature of intelligence. Albert Einstein called Piaget's discovery so simple only a genius could have thought of it. Piaget believed that children took an active role in the learning process, acting much like little scientists as they perform experiments, make observations, and learn about the world. As kids interact with the world around them, they continually add new knowledge, build upon existing knowledge, and adapt previously held ideas to accommodate new information. During the earliest stage of this cognitive development, infants and toddlers acquire knowledge through sensory experiences and manipulating objects. A child's entire experience at the earliest period of this stage occurs through basic reflexes, senses, and motor responses. If you think about it, when a person is exposed to Christianity for the very first time, a lot of times the testimonies and stories start with somebody sitting at the very last row in the church and going and attending week after week and just looking or listening and observing. Or they were exposed to it because of a friend or a colleague or maybe a relative. And just by observing them and their lifestyle, they started to intrigue them and they decided to start investigating it more. That's kind of like this stage in infancy, if you think about it. The second stage, and this is the foundations of language development, have already been laid out at this stage, but it's now what he refers to as the emergence of language. That is one of the major hallmarks of this stage, the pre-operational stage of development. Children become more skilled at pretend play during this stage, yet still think very concretely about the world around them. In comparison, a new Christian is starting a new way of life, attending church, trying a Bible study, etc. And in a way, this is kind of a pretend play for them. It's a new way of life that is not familiar. Now, during this stage, children become less egocentric and begin to think about how people might think and feel. Kids in the concrete operational stage also begin to understand that their thoughts are unique to them and that not everyone else necessarily shares their thoughts, feelings, and opinions. In this stage, for spiritual development, it may relate to navigating the relationships that are not experiencing the same type of growth. The young Christian is realizing how others might perceive They're a spiritual life choice. They might feel like there's an eye on them now, and they're aware of it. They're aware of things outside of their own selfishness. My son is 6 years old, and he's still at that stage of, not thinking about anybody else but himself. You go pick up go run an errand and have to pick up a birthday gift for somebody. It was his dad's birthday recently, so he went to go look for something, and his instant thought was to find something for himself rather than for his dad. He's still in that, kind of call it that selfish mode, but he's egocentric. This final stage of Piaget's theory involves an increase in logic, the ability to use deductive reasoning and an understanding of abstract ideas. At this point, people become capable of seeing multiple potential solutions to problems and think more scientifically about the world around them. For the Christian, this is similar to when maturity starts to take root. Studying and communion with God would be honest and sincere at this stage. Monadel Klaus wrote a really lovely article while Piaget was still alive. This was back in 1971. She offered her comparison of this theory to a Christian spiritual growth. In it, she wrote, "A child in the third or last stage of cognition is able to orient his thoughts toward the possible. Like the Christian, too, should reach a stage of spiritual development in which he is able to see a much larger picture than his own perceptions and experiences have given him." There's scripture references through some of the articles that I've researched. There's work of Jean Piaget, also has thoughtful inferences for those of us who are Christian. Scriptures provide comparisons between the spiritual growth and child development. There's scriptures about discipline. There's scriptures about obedience, the growth and development. So here are just a couple of examples regarding discipline. I liked Hebrews 12:7, "Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children, for what children are not disciplined by their father?" It's the discipline as we're growing, and as a child, as we're growing, it's that discipline that is teaching us right from wrong. And I believe that as a Christian, as we go through the stages of spiritual development, we will learn from discipline as well. Either we make a mistake and we're going to learn from it, or we learn by reading scripture and Bible study what maybe we had been doing in the past is actually not okay and we should stop. Sometimes our thinking, I remember learning the lesson about gossip as an adult, how bad that is. And that was something that I really wasn't disciplined with until, I was in my, I think, 30s. In regards to obedience, I like 1 Peter 1:14, "As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance." That was before I learned my behaviors before, and then I realized how wrong it was. The scholars that I found and some of the papers that I wrote, papers that I read, also had a lot of comments in regards to the social effects, the environments that affect our development as children, but also as adults in our spiritual walk. So Gallagher and Newton shared their findings in a paper. Entwistle, of course, talks a lot about it throughout the book, but I picked up one sentence out of a chapter where he says, "We are relational beings with social capacities and needs." There's a lot of variables in this concept as well. There's these different stages that Piaget brought up. There's different stages in our spiritual growth as Christians, but everybody grows at different rates and paces. Piaget believed that children develop steadily and gradually throughout the varying stages, and that the experiences in one stage form the foundations for movement to the next. So you can't skip a stage, basically. People can be stuck in a stage. A growing Christian can get spiritually stuck. Maybe something happened in their life that was traumatic, and they lost focus on God and his word. And it could take years to break through and get to the next stage in that growth. God has given us instruction about this. He wants for us to be always seeking and learning. 1 Peter 2:2-3 says it well. "Like newborn babies, Crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. I felt like this was a great way to end this presentation. It ties it up nicely with the development of a child and the development of a Christ follower. Thank you very much.